Hi everyone, it's Ren here. I hope you're doing well. In this video, I forgot to say, welcome to my room. So in this video I'd like to talk about this topic that we hear mentioned often, according to which INFJs, not only INFJs but among other types, INFJs have difficulty with criticism. Sorry, I'm just picking up my headphones. They're fully charged. This is my instrument for dealing with anxiety-inducing environments, protection, noise cancelling. So, INFJ is supposed to take criticism sometimes a little badly, or to be easily sensitive to criticism, to feel like they're a little bit easily upset by criticism. They can take it a little seriously, maybe all too easily, and even when they know that that's the case, it's hard to take practical measures towards making things better, making themselves less likely to be upset. Let's see if I can. As you know, this room is easily too bright, so hopefully this will be better. INFJs. So the first question that perhaps we could ask is it true that INFJs are more easily upset than average by criticism? So in my experience, meaning myself, but also INFJs that I have known in the past, I would say this is true. I think that more than most other types that I know, INFJs are easily, shaken by criticism. Not necessarily any kind of criticism, but let's say that, if you like, their tolerance for tactless criticism, for slightly too direct criticism, for kind of no bullshit criticism, for criticism that kind of holds no punches. The tolerance threshold of an INFJ, I think, tends on average to be kind of weak. I think INFPs have a similar problem, if you want to take that as a problem. And again, it's quite interesting to note that INFPs have no functions in common with us in their main stack, us meaning INFJs. And yet you see, we still observe this phenomenon. There's a great level of sensitivity in these two types. I think in general, extroverts tend to be a little bit less sensitive to that specifically. I mean, not in general, but to critique. Extroverted thinkers, even more. Thinkers in general. I would say that even, extroverted feelers, like my dad. Like, my dad is emotional, undoubtedly. And I've got a very good friend. In fact, I've got lots of very good friends who are ENFPs. But I just feel like somehow they don't quite internalize the critique. They don't quite expose themselves to the risk of internalizing the critique and make it their own, as INFJs and INFPs are. So here, we could maybe hypothesize that they're like the interplay between NI and FE. Next to the interplay between FI and NE, on the one hand, the NIFE of an INFJ, on the other hand, the FINE of an INFP, So obviously two very different nexuses or nexi. I don't know what the plural of nexus is. Very different, not involving the same functions, but again, contributing to a state of being which by its nature, by default, starts with a grounds of relative precarity in the face of critique and likelihood of taking something a little personally or being hurt by something higher than for other types, especially thinkers, extroverted thinkers, and even extroverted feelers. I think I would, one would assume that because sensors tend to be, so to speak, more down to earth than intuitives, and because they're more sort of like in touch with the real world, in touch with the practical side of things, as a rule, as a whole, that they're also less likely to be sensitive to that kind of criticism, because you can imagine that like intuition is in a certain sense correlated with introversion, but I'm not sure it is, to be honest. I think that ISFJs can be very sensitive, ISFPs as well, and so that it doesn't quite seem to work out this way. My mum is a sensor, she's an ISFP, and she's very sensitive to critique in the same way that I am sensitive to critique, and that my brother is sensitive to critique. We manifest it in different ways, but almost like the different ways in which that sensitivity is manifested. I mean, probably type explains part of it. It contributes some explanatory power, but also definitely other variables that have nothing to do with type, and that really suggests the limitedness of the typological model to explain behavior. I mean, my brother, for example, I think, he's an FI-dom just like my mum is. He doesn't show his sensitivity as much. I think partly that has to do with gender constructs and what men are supposed to show or not to show. In Ireland, a lot of the INFPs that I'm friends with, similarly, Irish society being still to some extent influenced by atavisms from, an era more influenced by Catholicism than it is now. Catholicism, conservatism that it is now, still expects, or you still see men trying to not show emotion too much, even though like most of the INFP friends that I have in Ireland are extremely sensitive and extremely intelligent emotionally, but it's not necessarily an easy thing for them to show it. Somehow, weirdly enough, in the south of France, where the culture is more macho, much more macho, there's a mix between the macho-ness of that culture and a sort of exuberance when expressing states of mind, talkativeness, affirmation of self, but also emotional exuberance, which makes it almost more okay to be expressive of one's feelings as a man. It's a weird contrast. A macho society where a man can express emotions almost more than a non-macho society like Ireland, or less macho. And yet at the same time, I think that the sort of palette, the diversity of emotions that are okay to express, sometimes even in exaggerated fashion, in the south of France is more limited than the palette of expressions that a man can express in Ireland at a lower intensity. But this does not really resolve our problem. What is it about INFJs that seems to create a little context for this sensitivity to critique? So I think introverted intuition is really, in this case, I want to say not helpful, because we intuit things very quickly and we make them our own very quickly. And in combination with FE, with extroverted feeling, now the complicated thing is that we tend to take like external things of the world related to human beings and human interactions as universal, meaning that we relate to things as if they were universal, meaning that we're going to take them seriously. So in a sense, this does have an impact on how we tend to care about what others think, you know, a lot more than a TE user would, for instance, a lot of the time. We care about what others think. I care about what others think. My dad, I know my dad cares about what others think. And I think in a way it's constitutively embedded in our sort of existential makeup, which suggests that it's not necessarily something that we need to suppress, because caring what others think, I mean, to an extent, if a person never does it, that person is a sociopath, you know. So it's important to care about what others think, but I suppose it's important to be able to limit the extent to which that makes us upset, you know. So it's good to sort of have an availability within oneself for hearing what others think and for giving it some importance, I think. It's not true that to care about what others think is a bad thing. I think what's not a good thing is to become overwhelmed by one's anticipation or one's assumption about what others think, because, you know, a lot of the time the extent of the critique that seems to be leveled at us and we feel as hurtful, often the extent of it is not as large as we think. We assume it is larger than it really is, and this is something that I think we are again predisposed to do a little bit once we have taken seriously the things that we take seriously via FE. With NI and TI, and NI and TI's propensity to loop together, and so to create insights, to justify the insights prior to them having been kind of empirically verified, and to sort of continue looping into this production of unverified and yet rationalized insights until one becomes kind of paranoid about what has been created and justified. Well, this mixed with FE can easily turn into just projecting and imagining a lot of potential slights and a lot of things that were supposedly implied in something we really heard. And so you can really link it here with SE as well, NISE axis. We hear with our senses something. We intuit from it a critique, also via FE, NIFE. But we rationalize, we produce more insights than were justified by the critique, or hearing the critique via FE, rationalize them via TI, continue producing insight via NI. And this is how we can end up taking too seriously, taking too far, sort of the deep end, things that were not supposed to be as literal or as extensive from a critical perspective as we think. And so in a way we castigate ourselves, we self-castigate. And I think there's a great correlation between NITI looping and self-castigation and paranoia, and I think we've all been through that, and that explains the oversensitivity of INFJs sometimes, if you want to call it that. Now, not oversensitivity in general, because I don't think there's such a thing as being too sensitive in general. It's great to be a sensitive being, a person, but let's say oversensitivity to criticism, specifically contextual sensitivity to criticism. A difficulty with managing to sort of keep a neutral stance or an objective stance on the criticism that's formulated in regard to us, our work. You know, I used to be super sensitive about my academic work. like when I would, especially when I was working on my PhD and I was submitting chapters to my supervisor, and some of them I reworked into article submissions to journals, and sometimes the criticism I was getting from the peer reviews was pretty scathing. I felt it to be scathing, and I was hurting for days, and I was telling myself, I'll forget about this career. I'll never submit an article again to these worthless people who are not better than me, and yet they're using their anonymity to try to destroy me, and so I went, I did a lot of NITI looping at the time, and I guess it's hard to extricate oneself from it. And what's especially hard is that it's not easy for us to update our set of convictions or a set of assumptions that are being critiqued, because NI is something so personal to us that it's not so easy to make it flexible. And because we cannot make it that flexible to external gazes, we feel like it to be all the more unjustified when it is critiqued, because it's almost as if our spirit were saying, but who are they to know this? Who are they to claim that they understand what I'm about? They can only see a tip of the iceberg, and they're criticizing the tip of the iceberg as if they saw the whole iceberg that I am, and that I work into my writing or anything that I do that's susceptible of being assessed and criticized. And so it's very hard for us to separate ourselves from what we do, because in a way what we do is part of our NI insight, which, if you like, it's a meta insight. We produce NI insights, but we also have a meta generator of insight, which is NI itself within us. And when a micro insight of ours, which we worked into a paper or whatever, is being criticized, we feel as if it is the meta insight that is being criticized. And because we associate the meta insight with ourselves, we feel like we are being criticized ourselves. So, what to do? That's a big question. I think that to some extent I've managed to get better at handling criticism, although it would be a lie to say that I'm the best, and I probably will never be. It always hurts. But separating oneself, and I talked about it in a video that I made also on INTPs, because INTPs are likely to be among the types that will critique in a forceful and biting fashion, never unfairly, but sometimes holding no punches, and being kind of a bit blunt, which could hurt us, which can hurt us, which has hurt me, academically, especially in the past. And in the video about INTPs, I was talking about how it's important to separate ourselves from our insights, but it's true that having thought about it more, I've come to the realization that constitutively it's hard for us to do that because of the very intimate relationship that we have with what we do. Everybody has an intimate relationship with what they do because it's their own, because they produce something, and insofar as they produce it, it becomes their creation, and it's an extension of them. But I think via NI, for us, this extension was there from the beginning, even before it came into being as a creation. We had already created it in our mind. There was already an extension of ourselves. So it's almost like our creations are extensions of ourselves in almost a more intimate way. So how do we manage to not be upset if it seems existentially constitutive of an INFJ to feel like when what they do or create is criticized, it is them who are criticized? Good question. It's a very good question. Maybe I'll make another video on that particular topic, how to deal with criticism, how to manage to handle it better. What would be some practical pieces of advice that I could give, or that I can look for myself, from people who have thought about these questions before. It's already been a long video, so I'm going to probably stop it here. And in the next episode, maybe, we'll see, I'll talk about the practical approaches that we could develop to make our skin thicker. See you guys.